I saw something today a father should never have to see. My own son, the boy I carried on my shoulders when his legs were too small for the world, standing in my living room with his wife, rifling through my life like thieves. They thought they were alone. They thought I was napping. They had no idea the security cameras I'd sent for repair were already back online. No idea that the phone in my pocket showed me everything. Ethan's hands opening my folder of papers I always kept locked in my desk. Sophia whispering to him to find the original deed, because the copies won't pass. I felt the air leave my chest the way it does when a doctor says a word you pray never to hear. Before I begin, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Your words keep me going when the story gets dark. I had forgotten to tell them the technician came 3 days ago. Absent-minded mistake, or maybe a small mercy from God. The new app showed the house in angles I'd never seen before, crisp, merciless, honest. In that honesty, I watched my son bend over my coffee table, his shoulders tight, his jaw grinding like a stranger's. "Check the bedroom drawers again," Sophia said, voice low and sharp, the way a knife talks to a cutting board. Ethan moved like he'd practiced this. He knew which drawer held the passports, which envelope held the bank letters, which corner hid the spare keys. He knew because I taught him order. I taught him where things belong, the meaning of a place for everything, the dignity of being prepared. Now he was using my lessons as a map to steal the treasure. They spoke the way people speak when they've convinced themselves that evil is another word for necessary. Sophia said a name, Damien, and I knew without needing to know that he was a lawyer who preferred dark corners. "Damien needs the original," she said, lifting a paper to the light as if sunlight could bless a crime. "Without the original, we can't make it believable." Ethan grunted, frustrated. "He'll sign if we tell him it's for medical stuff," he said. "He's tired lately. He won't read." Tired. I laughed without sound. I wasn't tired. I was old enough to see betrayal wear my son's face. The camera caught a small moment that will haunt me longer than the big ones. Ethan paused, turned his head, and looked straight at the lens he didn't know was awake. For a heartbeat, I thought he felt me watching. For a heartbeat, I thought the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest would surface and remember. Then the heartbeat died. He looked away. Sophia gathered the papers with a casual cruelty, left them stacked in the wrong order, like fingerprints on my piece. I stood in the kitchen doorway, phone cold in my hand, and understood that the life I built plank by plank had begun to burn, and that I would be the one to pull the fire alarm. The war had already started. They just didn't know I was the one drawing the map. When I first bought this house, my hands were raw from years of working double shifts at the steel plant. The walls smelled of fresh paint and hope, and I swore to myself it would be more than just bricks and wood. It would be a fortress, a place where my boy would always feel safe. I laid every tile, fixed every crack, even planted the oak tree in the yard so he'd have shade when he played outside. That tree is taller than me now, its roots buried deep like the sacrifices I made. When my wife walked out on us, leaving Ethan barely 5 years old, I promised him he would never feel abandoned again. I told him I'd be both father and mother, protector and provider, and for decades I kept that promise. I didn't remarry. I didn't chase other dreams. I worked, saved, and built. Every nail I hammered into this home was a vow that he would never know hunger, never feel small, never doubt he was loved. I remember his little hands clutching my calloused fingers when I came home late at night. His smile was my paycheck when my back ached from hauling steel. When he fell sick, I sat by his bed and whispered stories until dawn, even though I had a 12-hour shift ahead of me. When he needed books for school, I sold my own father's watch to pay for them. And when college came, I worked until my bones creaked to cover tuition so he would walk across that stage debt-free. I gave him everything I never had. I wore the same boots until the soles gave way, just so he could have decent shoes. I went without vacations, without rest, without a partner by my side, because all I wanted was to see him rise higher than me. That's why watching him now, scheming with his wife to gut me alive while I still breathe, tore something deeper than flesh. Ethan wasn't just my son. He was my life's work, my reason for waking before the sun. And Sophia, the woman I welcomed as a daughter, the woman I led into my home with open arms, was standing beside him, feeding his greed like poison dripping into his ear. Together they weren't just trying to steal a house. They were trying to erase me, reduce 35 years of prose, left sweat and sacrifice into a number they could cash at a bank. $600,000. That was what my love, my labor, my entire life was worth to them. A price tag. And as I watched the two of them whisper in my living room, I understood that this betrayal wasn't sudden. No, it was patient, careful, and cruelly rehearsed. They had been building their plan while I was still believing in them. The next morning, when I opened the app to check the cameras again, I saw them in the living room, as if it belonged to them. My documents were scattered across the table: birth certificates, bank letters, the old appraisal papers. Ethan's voice carried sharp through the tiny speaker on my phone. "The last appraisal says the house is worth more than $600,000. Damien was right. It's worth every risk." 600,000. The number stabbed me deeper than a knife. I remembered the years I spent patching machines with my bare hands, inhaling the smoke of molten steel, skipping meals just to stretch a paycheck. 600,000 wasn't just a value on a piece of paper. It was my entire life measured in dollars. My youth and my body poured into these walls. Sophia picked up a paper and held it to the light. Her tone was cold, professional, like she'd done this a dozen times before. "Once Damien has the original deed, we can sell within weeks. He said he can bribe someone at the registry to push it through quickly, but without the original, nothing moves." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles went white. Damien. The man's name sounded like a disease, the kind that spreads in shadows and eats away at good families. Ethan had met him at a bar, claimed he was just a resourceful lawyer. I had known from the start the man reeked of trouble. Now I understood why. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a parasite feeding on my son's desperation and greed. "Dad will sign if we push the right story," Ethan muttered, pacing like a wolf trapped in a cage. "We'll tell him it's medical insurance forms, or an update for his pension. He's old, he won't question it." I felt my chest tighten, not from age, but from heartbreak. Old. He called me old, like it was weakness, like it erased the decades I carried him on my shoulders. Sophia crossed her arms, her eyes sharp with calculation. "If he hesitates, we pressure him. Damien said once the papers are signed, it's impossible to reverse. We'll put him in a smaller place, maybe a one-bedroom apartment. That's all he needs for his last years. My last years." They spoke about me as though I were already buried, as though my breath were just an inconvenience. I wanted to burst into that room, slam my fist on the table, and remind them whose sweat had built every inch of this home. But I stayed frozen in the kitchen, phone trembling in my hand, heart pounding like a war drum, because for the first time I understood the depth of their betrayal. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a plan, deliberate and cruel. And I realized that the boy I once rocked to sit, Leap, was gone, replaced by a man willing to sell his own father's blood for $600,000 and a dream poisoned by greed. Later that day I watched through the camera as Ethan stormed out of my bedroom, drawers hanging open, frustration painted across his face. "Nothing," he muttered, tossing his hands in the air. He must have a safe deposit box. He was always paranoid about documents. Paranoid. The word stung, twisted into an insult when in truth it had been my shield. My careful nature had kept my life's work secure, and now it was the very thing standing in their way. Sophia tapped her foot impatiently, arms folded. "Damien gave us until Friday. Without that deed, we can't move forward. I am not wasting more weeks living on crumbs." Crumbs. She spat the word with disgust, as if the $800 I gave them each month out of my pension was an insult instead of a lifeline. Money I could hardly spare, money I gave to keep peace under my own roof, was now belittled as scraps. Ethan collapsed into my old armchair, the same one where I once sat with him as a child, reading stories until he drifted to sleep. He rubbed his temples like the burden of robbing me weighed heavier than his conscience. "We'll trick him," he finally said, his voice hollow. "Tell him it's insurance papers. He won't even read it. He trusts me." I wanted to scream. Trust. He dared to use that word, twisting the bond between father and son into a weapon. Sophia's lips curved into a cruel smile. "Perfect. Tomorrow we'll bring Damien's forged documents and tell him it's for updating his will. He'll sign without question." Their plan was so rehearsed, so precise, that it felt like watching a theater performance written for my destruction. They stacked my papers in a messy pile, without care for the order I always maintained, and left the room as if they had already won. But I sat in the kitchen, phone still in my hand, breath shallow, and I knew something they didn't. They thought they were the hunters, circling their prey, ready to pounce, but I had the advantage they could not see. Every word, every whisper, every cruel plan was captured on that little lens above their heads, and while they sharpened their knives in secret, I was already collecting the evidence that would one day hang them with their own rope. For a moment, Ethan lingered in the room. He looked directly at the camera, though he couldn't know it was alive. His face softened for a flicker of a second, and he whispered, almost to himself, "I wish we didn't have to do this." Sophia's voice cut through his hesitation like glass. "Think about our future. Think about the children we want. This house is our chance to be free from him." And just like that, I watched greed harden his features again. The son I raised disappeared, leaving behind only a stranger willing to carve out my life for his future. And in that moment, my grief turned into something sharper. Betrayal had burned me raw, but beneath the ashes, a resolve was beginning to take shape. They wanted war, and I would give it to them. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed where my bones had ached after years of shifts at the plant, staring at the ceiling, replaying their words over and over again. His last years. Crumbs. Sign without reading. Every phrase cut like a blade, each one carving away pieces of the love I once thought unbreakable. I closed my eyes and drifted back through time, to the days when I carried Ethan on my shoulders to the park, when I stood in the rain outside his school just to catch him smiling as he ran into my arms. I thought of the nights I went hungry so he could eat, the boots I wore until they split so he could have new ones for his first day of middle school. Every sacrifice I made felt like a brick in the foundation of this house, of our lives, of the bond I believed was eternal. When his mother left, he was barely more than a child. I still remember the way his little face pressed into my chest, as I promised him we didn't need anyone else, that I would give him everything. And I did. I never remarried, never sought companionship, because I was too busy being both parents in one body. I worked overtime shifts until my hands trembled so he could have books, shoes, and meals without worry. I stood in the cold bleachers at every school game, clapping until my palms stung, even when I had to rush straight to work afterward. I poured my life into him so he would grow tall, strong, and unafraid. College was the final mountain I climbed for him. Tuition was a weight that threatened to crush me, but I carried it anyway. I sold tools, I borrowed against my pension, I picked up odd jobs that left my body broken, all so my son could walk across a stage in a gown, his future secure. When he held that diploma, my chest swelled with pride so deep it almost hurt. I thought, this is it. This is what it was all for. I told myself the endless nights and the quiet sacrifices were worth it, because he would have the life I never could. But standing here now, watching him plot to steal the very house that sheltered him, I felt as though every sacrifice had been spit on. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed the years, the memories, the sweat, the hunger, the dreams I had starved myself of so he could thrive. Sophia, who I welcomed as family, who I thought would bring joy into his life, had turned into his accomplice, feeding the hunger I never taught him to have. My life's work had become their blueprint for theft, and as the truth burned through me, I realized something I never wanted to admit. The boy I raised was gone, and in his place stood a man willing to bury me alive if it meant cashing in on my years of devotion. On Tuesday morning, I checked the app again, and there they were, sitting in my living room as if it were a boardroom for their conspiracy. Sophia had her laptop open, papers spread across the table, her face lit up by the glow of the screen. Ethan paced back and forth like a restless animal, gnawing on his nails, a habit I remembered from when he was, as a boy, when I'd gently pull his hand away and tell him he was stronger than his nerves. Now, that nervous twitch was back, only this time it wasn't about a spelling test or a soccer game. It was about betraying the man who raised him. "Damien says he has the papers ready," Sophia announced, scrolling through an email. Her voice was steady, calm, like someone reading out a grocery list, but her words sliced through me. "We just need the original deed for the final comparison. Without that, the signatures won't line up." "What if he notices it's missing?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. He stopped pacing and stared at her with the same look I'd seen when he was a teenager caught lying. Except this wasn't about sneaking out at night. This was about stealing my life. Sophia smirked, not even looking up from the screen. "He's 70 now. He hasn't checked those documents in months. We'll just take it for a few hours and put it back before he even notices." Take it. They spoke about my deed, my home, my blood and sweat, as if it were a library book they could borrow and return without consequence. But then the numbers spilled out, and that's when I truly felt the weight of their greed. "Damien charges $30,000 for the whole process," Sophia said matter-of-factly. It's expensive, but we're talking about a profit of over $150,000 after the sale. It's worth it. $30,000. That was the price tag they had put on my trust, on my roof, on my life's work. I had worked decades for every dollar in this house, and they were willing to throw it into the lap of a crooked lawyer just to carve me out of existence. I watched Ethan sit down heavily beside her. For a moment, his shoulders sagged, and I almost saw the boy he used to be, the boy who once cried into my chest when nightmares woke him, the boy who told me I was his hero. But then Sophia leaned closer, whispering venom into his ear. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened, and the boy was gone. I sat there, phone trembling in my hands, realizing that I wasn't just up against their greed. I was up against their unity. Together, they had transformed betrayal into a mission, and while they plotted, I quietly recorded every word, every amount, every timeline. They thought they were building a future without me. What they didn't know was that I was already building their downfall, one recording at a time. For the next 3 days, I became an actor in my own home. By morning, I was the same old father they thought they knew, smiling at them across the breakfast table, asking about their plans, pretending I believed Ethan's lie about job interviews. By night, I was a man with fire in his chest, replaying every recording, memorizing every word of their treachery. I made their coffee, folded their laundry, even cooked their favorite meals, though every spoon I stirred felt like I was mixing poison. When I handed them the $800 I had been giving them each month, I did it with steady hand. DS, even as my insides twisted. They had called it crumbs, scraps, as though my generosity were nothing more than pity tossed to beggars. Yet I gave it anyway, because I wanted them to feel safe in their arrogance. I forced myself to watch them through the cameras, not just for proof, but to understand them, to see if there was any trace of the boy I raised hiding beneath Ethan's hardened face. But what I saw wasn't my son. It was a stranger lounging on my armchair, feet propped on my table, whispering with his wife about the life they would build with my money. They laughed together sometimes, small bursts of joy at the thought of selling the house that had sheltered them. Sophia leaned into him with eyes shining, not with love, but with hunger, and Ethan looked at her like she was his compass, even if she was leading him straight into the abyss. Every time I passed them in the hallway, I felt their eyes on me, measuring me, testing the strength of my steps, the clarity of my words. I knew what they were doing. They were painting a picture of me as weak, confused, disposable, a picture they could use when the time came to force my signature or declare me incompetent. So I played along. I let my hands tremble when I held a mug. I pretended to forget where I had placed my glasses. I asked Sophia twice in the same day what time they planned to go shopping. I gave them just enough to believe I was slipping, enough to make them confident. But inside, I was sharper than I had been in years. Betrayal has a way of sharpening the dullest edges of a man. I kept my voice calm, my steps measured, my mask fixed. I was the dutiful father on the surface, the devoted provider, the harmless old man. But beneath the mask, I was a hunter in my own house, waiting for the right moment to bare my teeth. They thought they were weaving a web around me. What they didn't see was that I was already cutting every thread, preparing to trap them inside their own lies. On Wednesday morning, the air in the house felt heavy, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. I sat at the dining table with my coffee when Ethan slid a folder across the wood toward me. His smile was thin, strained, the kind that never reached his eyes. Sophia sat beside him, her hand resting casually on the papers, but her gaze sharp and unyielding. "Dad," Ethan began, his voice dipped in false tenderness, "we need to talk to you about something important." I forced a nod, pretending curiosity, though my stomach churned with rage I had to keep hidden. He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents, their pages crisp and too official-looking. "These are just some updates for your will and insurance. Standard stuff, nothing complicated. Damien helped us put them together, so everything will be in order in case anything happens." I lifted my eyes to him, feigning confusion. "In case anything happens?" I asked. "I'm still breathing, son." His smile faltered for a second, but Sophia jumped in, her tone syrupy sweet. "Of course you are, but it's better to be prepared, you know. This way you'll have peace of mind." I picked up the first page and skimmed it. The legal jargon was dense, but I caught enough to know what it really was. A transfer of rights, an irrevocable power of attorney, a complete handover of my home and finances. I set the paper down slowly, as though the weight of it were too much. "I don't really understand all this," I said, my voice deliberately unsure. "Could you explain it more slowly?" Sophia's mask cracked for just a second, irritation flashing in her eyes. "It's 20 pages of legal language, Richard," she said. "It would take days to explain everything." Ethan shot her a warning glance, then turned back to me with that fake compassion. "Dad, trust me. This is just to make sure I can handle things for you if you ever can't. You know, hospital bills, insurance, taxes, all those boring things." He pointed to 3 lines marked with small X's. "You just need to sign here, here, and here." I held the pen for a moment, my fingers curling around it. They both leaned forward slightly, watching me, waiting, but instead of signing, I placed it back on the table. "Let me think about it until tomorrow," I said, my tone calm but firm. The silence that followed was thick as tar. Ethan's jaw tightened, and Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Dad," Ethan said sharply, "the lawyer gave us an appointment tomorrow. If we don't bring these signed, we'll lose the opportunity." I leaned back in my chair, locking eyes with him. Then maybe the opportunity isn't worth it. His face twisted, a flash of the anger he'd been holding back. Sophia quickly placed her hand on his arm, squeezing it like a leash pulling back a rabid dog. "We just want what's best for you," she said, forcing a smile. But I saw through it. I had stalled them, bought myself time, and in that moment I knew the war wasn't just looming anymore. It had begun. That night, while they thought I was asleep, I sat in the dark kitchen with only the hum of the refrigerator for company and listened to their whispers drifting down the hallway. They believed I couldn't hear, but every word was as clear as glass. "He's getting suspicious," Ethan muttered, his voice low and tight. "What if he refuses to sign?" Sophia's tone was colder than winter steel. "Then we make him desperate. Damien said it himself. Pressure is the key. We cut off his comforts until he breaks." I held my breath, straining to hear every syllable, my heart pounding like a war drum. They laid out their plan with chilling precision. First, cancel my supplemental medical insurance, the one I relied on for better care when the public system failed. Without it, Sophia said, he'll be forced to face long waits and limited treatment. He'll panic. Then, the car. Ethan agreed to take away my access, claiming it was too expensive for me to drive. That meant no rides to the doctor, no trips to the store, no independence. "He'll have to rely on buses, taxis, or us," Sophia added with a smile I could almost hear. Next came groceries, the heavy bags, the bulk shopping trips, things they handled. Now, they would stop, leaving me to struggle alone with aching arms and an aging back. "He's too proud to ask neighbors for help," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. "Within 2 weeks he'll fold, he'll sign just to get us back on his side." 2 weeks. That was the deadline they gave themselves, the time they believed it would take to break me. I listened as they ticked off each step like generals plotting a siege. Insurance, transportation, food, even small luxuries like the occasional cleaning service I'd paid for. "We'll tell him it's temporary," Ethan said, "but he'll know it's punishment. He'll beg us to fix it. That's when we put the papers in front of him again." His words made my chest ache, not from age but from betrayal so heavy it nearly crushed me. They called it strategy. I called it cruelty. They weren't just trying to steal my house. They wanted to dismantle my dignity piece by piece, to turn me into a helpless old man who would surrender out of exhaustion. But they had miscalculated. I had lived through poverty, through loss, through nights when I didn't know how I'd feed my boy, but somehow found a way. If they thought I would crumble in 2 weeks, they had forgotten the man who raised Ethan from nothing. I sat there in the dark, fists clenched, and made myself a vow. They wanted to play games with pressure and desperation. Fine, but I would show them how a man with nearly 70 years of scars and survival behind him fights back. They thought they were tightening the noose. They didn't know I was already sharpening the blade that would cut it. The next morning I rose before dawn, long before Ethan or Sophia stirred, and stood at the window watching the first light creep across the yard. The oak tree I had planted decades ago swayed gently in the breeze, its roots deep, unshaken by storms. I realized I had to become like that tree, quiet, patient, but unbreakable. They thought they could wear me down with their petty cruelties, but I had endured worse storms in my life. I had endured hunger, loneliness, and endless nights on the factory floor with nothing but grit to keep me alive. 2 weeks of their tricks would not destroy me. Instead of panic, I chose preparation. I gathered every recording from the cameras, copied them onto a USB drive, and hid it in the hollow leg of an old chair in the garage. a place no thief or schemer would think to search. Then I sent copies to an email account I had created under a false name, one I had never told anyone about. If anything happened to me, if they managed to push me into a hospital or worse, my proof would live on. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the truth, and the truth needed a safe place to survive. Throughout the day, I watched them through my phone as if I were studying predators in the wild. Every time they whispered, every time they plotted, I noted it down in my mind. Their arrogance was a gift. It made them sloppy. They believed I was too old to notice, too trusting to question. They didn't see the steel beneath my silence. At lunch, Ethan casually mentioned that money was tight, and they might need to cut back on non-essential expenses. His eyes flicked to me as he spoke, searching for weakness. I nodded slowly, pretending to absorb his words like a confused old man. "I see," I said softly. Sophia smiled at him with triumph, believing I had taken the bait. Inside, I laughed without sound. They were tightening their own rope, not mine. That evening, I locked myself in my room and spread my papers across the bed. Bank statements, insurance documents, old letters, everything that told the story of my life. I wasn't just protecting property. I was protecting my history, my sacrifices, the proof of who I was and what I had built. I carefully marked the ones they would be most eager to see, the ones they would recognize as leverage. Then I placed them in a drawer with the cameras watching, like bait in a trap. They thought they were the hunters circling a tired old man. But I had lived too long, fought too hard, and sacrificed too much to be anyone's prey. Let them come closer. Let them believe I was weakening. Every smile I forced, every tremor I faked, every sigh I gave was part of my armor. The day would come when their lies would trap them, and when it did, I would be ready to strike. Thursday morning arrived with a quiet drizzle tapping against the windows, the kind of rain that seemed to whisper secrets. I sat at the breakfast table, sipping my coffee slowly, when Ethan finally spoke. His tone was rehearsed, measured, as though he'd been practicing in front of a mirror. "Dad, we need to talk to you about some changes, financial changes." Sophia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with false sympathy. I nodded, keeping my face blank, though inside I braced for the next blow. Ethan cleared his throat. "As you know, I've been looking for work for weeks without any luck. Things are difficult right now." Weeks. He said it like he had been trying, but I knew from the recordings he hadn't searched for anything at all. Sophia added her own line, perfectly in sync with him. "And our savings are running out faster than we thought." Savings. They had none. Every bill, every luxury, every meal was paid for, with my pension. "What does that mean for me?" I asked, letting my voice carry just enough worry to keep them comfortable in their lie. Ethan exhaled, as though what he was about to say pained him deeply. "It means we'll need to make some temporary adjustments to household expenses, just until things get better." Sophia placed her hand on his arm, giving the performance a touch of tenderness. "Like your supplemental medical insurance, the car for your appointments, some of the grocery runs, little things." I stirred my coffee and set the spoon down gently. "Little things," I repeated, as though I were thinking it over, but my mind was already racing. These weren't little things, they were lifelines. They wanted me to feel abandoned, cornered. Ethan leaned in, his eyes searching mine. "It's temporary, Dad, but if we had those documents signed, we could make some long-term investments to secure all of our futures." There it was, the real reason behind the manufactured crisis. They had stripped away their mask of care, and what remained was nothing but greed, dressed in the language of family. I looked at him, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, and for the first time in days I let the truth leave my lips. "You're betraying me," I said softly, but firmly. The words froze the room. Ethan's spoon clattered into his empty bowl. Sophia blinked, her smile faltering. "Dad, that's not fair," she began, but I raised a hand to stop her. "Not fair?" My voice was sharper now, cutting through the air like a blade. "I worked myself into the ground to give you everything, and now you sit here plotting to strip me of the very roof I built with my sweat. You call it protection. I call it theft." Ethan slammed his fist on the table, his mask cracking. "We're trying to help you," he shouted, but his anger betrayed him. He wasn't helping me. He was helping himself. I leaned back, calm in the storm I had just unleashed, and whispered the truth they couldn't bear to hear. "No, son, you're trying to erase me." The silence after my words hung heavy, like smoke that refused to clear. Ethan's face reddened, his fists clenched, but it was Sophia who recovered first. She straightened in her chair, her lips curling into that condescending smile she wore like armor. "Richard," she said softly, as though speaking to a child, "you're confused. You've been more forgetful lately, more suspicious. This isn't betrayal, it's just paranoia." Paranoia. The word slid across the table like venom. Ethan seized it instantly, grasping the lifeline she threw him. "Dad, you've been acting different for months, distrusting us, second-guessing everything. That's why we wanted you to sign the papers, to protect you in case your mind declines." His voice broke slightly on that last word, but it wasn't grief I heard. It was calculation. I sat back, letting them weave their web, even as my heart burned. They weren't just planning to rob me now. They were laying the groundwork to declare me incompetent, to twist my vigilance into madness. Sophia leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "It happens at your age, forgetting things, seeing threats where there are none. We love you, but you need help." Help. That word had once meant holding Ethan's hand when he was sick, or patching his scraped knees after a fall. Now it meant stripping me of my independence, locking me away, all while they pocketed my life's work. I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I lifted my mug, playing into the picture they wanted to paint. Their eyes lit up as if they had caught me in proof of their lies. "What if he refuses to see a doctor?" Ethan asked, his voice low but audible. I heard Sophia's answer clearly through the camera later that night, when I replayed it. "Then we'll arrange it another way. A routine checkup, a little pressure. Once Damien has the papers and a certificate from a doctor, it's over." I realized then how deep their scheme went. It wasn't just about forged signatures anymore. They wanted to build a case that I was unfit to decide anything. They would strip me not just of my house, but of my very identity, my voice, my right to say no. They wanted to bury me alive in legal jargon and psychiatric lies. But as they spoke, confident and cruel, I felt something inside me harden. They thought they were clever, turning my caution into insanity, my silence into weakness. They had no idea that every word was being preserved, every manipulation stored away. They believed they were breaking me, when in truth they were writing their own confession. And I swore in that moment, while they looked at me with pity in their eyes, that I would make them choke on their own lies before this war was over. The next day I heard Ethan on the phone from his room. His voice carried just enough for me to catch the words that froze my blood. "Dr. Rivera, it's Ethan. I'm worried about my father's mental state. He's paranoid. He thinks we're conspiring against him. He even installed cameras to spy on us." He paused, sighing dramatically, as though it pained him to say such things. "Yes, doctor, severe paranoia. It's been getting worse." I stood in the hallway, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. He was laying the foundation for my destruction, painting me as a man gone mad. Every step I had taken to protect myself, every recording I had made, was now being twisted into evidence of insanity. I felt the walls close in, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. Anger would do me no good now. Patience would. That afternoon, I called Dr. Rivera myself. "Doctor, it's Richard Jones," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, then her tone softened. "Richard, your son was just here yesterday. He said you've been showing signs of paranoia." I swallowed hard. "Doctor, my son and his wife are trying to steal my house. They've been plotting with a crooked lawyer. I have recordings of everything. They're trying to make me look incompetent so I can't stop them." Another pause, longer this time. "Those are very serious accusations. Do you have proof?" she asked. My hands trembled, but not from age, from fury. "Yes," I said firmly. "Recordings, documents, even their own words about a $30,000 bribe. I'm not confused, doctor. I am being betrayed." Her voice changed then, from cautious to sharp with understanding. "Richard, I've known your medical history for 15 years. You've never shown signs of dementia or paranoia. If you have recordings, then what you're experiencing isn't decline. It's survival." My chest tightened, but this time with relief. Someone believed me. Someone saw through their lies. She insisted on running a full cognitive exam that same afternoon, and I agreed. In her office, she tested my memory, my reasoning, my orientation. I answered every question, every puzzle, with clarity sharpened by the fire of betrayal. At the end, she looked at me and nodded. You're sharper than most men 20 years younger. I'll document this officially. They won't be able to use mental health as a weapon against you. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight on my chest lift slightly. They thought they had trapped Mo in their narrative of madness, but I had broken free. Not only that, I had an ally now. Dr. Rivera promised to connect me with a private detective and a lawyer who specialized in protecting the elderly from abuse. And as I left her office, the rain finally clearing from the sky, I knew my war was no longer one I would fight alone. My son believed he was silencing me. Instead, he had just armed me. The following morning, I sat in the kitchen waiting for a quiet knock on the back door. At exactly 7 o'clock, a man in a gray suit stepped in, followed by a technician carrying a small case of equipment. The detective introduced himself simply as Carter, his voice calm but steady, the kind of voice that made you believe he'd seen darker things than this. "Mr. Jones," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "we'll get you the proof you need." His confidence steadied my heartbeat in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. Within an hour, my house became a stage prepared for the final act. They installed microscopic cameras in the dining room and living room, so small they were invisible even to my own eyes. They placed a thin microphone inside my shirt collar, nearly weightless but capable of recording every breath, every whisper. The technician moved with quiet precision, and when he was done, he gave me a nod. They won't suspect a thing. Carter leaned across the table and looked me in the eye. "All you need to do is let them talk. Get them comfortable. Don't push too hard, but don't resist too quickly either. We want them to confess in their own words, about the forgery, about the 30,000, about their plan to sell the house and put you away. If they say it clearly, we'll have everything we need to bring them down." I swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing on my chest. "And if they realize I'm recording them?" Carter's expression didn't change. "Then you're in danger, but you'll also know the truth about how far they're willing to go. Either way, you won't be alone anymore." As they left, the sun crept higher, throwing beams of light across the dining table where Ethan and Sophia liked to spread my papers. I sat there alone for a while, staring at that table, remembering when it had been a place of birthdays and Christmas dinners, of laughter and stories shared over warm meals. Now it was the battlefield where the future of my life would be decided. Later that afternoon, Ethan came home first. He walked past me with the casual air of a man who believed the world was already his. Sophia followed not long after, her heels clicking like nails in a coffin. I watched them from my chair, every movement recorded, every sound captured. They thought they were circling me, ready to strike. What they didn't know was that the walls themselves had turned into witnesses. As the evening shadows lengthened, I folded my hands, steadied my breathing, and prepared myself for what was coming. Tomorrow, they would sit me at that very table and push the papers toward me aghast. Tomorrow, I would let them reveal themselves completely, and tomorrow, without ever raising my voice, I would begin the end of their game. The next afternoon, just as Carter had predicted, Ethan spread the documents across the dining table with the patience of a hunter setting bait. Sophia sat beside him, a pen poised neatly on the first page, her eyes glinting with victory before the battle had even begun. "All right, Dad," Ethan said, his tone dripping with manufactured gentleness. "We're going to go through each form together so you feel comfortable." I adjusted the collar of my shirt ever so slightly, ensuring the hidden microphone caught every word. My hands appeared steady, but inside I could feel the storm gathering. He began explaining the first document line by line, careful and rehearsed, but the language betrayed him. It wasn't about protection, it was power. "This allows us to handle your affairs if you ever couldn't do it yourself," he said. His voice was smooth, but his eyes darted nervously toward Sophia for reassurance. I leaned forward, feigning innocence. "And what exactly does couldn't do it myself mean?" I asked softly. Sophia jumped in before he could answer. "Well, if you became ill, or your memory started failing, or even if you just didn't want the burden anymore, this way we could step in." I tilted my head, studying her. "Or if you decided my memory was failing, whether it was or not." For the first time, Ethan's mask cracked. He shifted in his seat, his patience thinning. "Dad, why would you even say that?" "Because," I said evenly, "it's awfully convenient that just when you're asking me to sign over everything, I suddenly start being called paranoid and confused." The silence that followed was telling. Sophia forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. "You're overthinking, Richard. This is just about family security." I slid my finger down the page and stopped at a clause buried in fine print. Explain this, then. It says here you can dispose of real estate as you see fit for the welfare of the grantor. That means you could sell my house without my consent. Ethan's jaw tightened. That clause is for emergencies. If you needed expensive medical care, for example. His tone was rising, his patience snapping thread by thread. And why, I asked, locking eyes with him, do you keep bringing up retirement homes? Sophia's smile finally collapsed, her voice turning sharp. Because we want to make sure you're taken care of in your last years. With the $600,000 from this house, we can find somewhere affordable and comfortable. It's the only way we can build a future for ourselves. There it was, the mask ripped away, the greed exposed in plain daylight. I leaned back, letting their words hang heavy in the air, knowing the cameras and microphones had captured it all. They thought they were tightening their grip on me. In truth, they were binding themselves tighter to the very noose they had crafted. The confession I had been waiting for was finally spilling from their lips, and all I had to do was sit still and let them destroy themselves. The room held its breath after Sophia's careless admission, but before either of them could scramble to patch the hole they'd torn open, the front door swung wide. Heavy footsteps crossed the threshold, and in strode Detective Carter with 2 uniformed officers and the elder protection lawyer at his side. The air cracked like thunder. Ethan froze mid-sentence, the color draining from his face, while Sophia's chair screeched backward as she stumbled to her feet. "Good afternoon," Carter said calmly, though his words carried the weight of a hammer. "Richard Jones, thank you for your patience. Ethan Jones, Sophia Jones, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted document forgery, and elder financial abuse." The officers moved in swiftly, their handcuffs gleaming under the dining room light. "This is a mistake," Sophia barked, her voice shrill with panic. "He's senile. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You can't just barge in here." Carter raised a hand, his face unflinching. "We don't barge in without evidence, and in this case we have plenty." I reached up and pulled the tiny microphone from my collar, laying it gently on the table beside the forged papers. "Every word you've spoken," I said quietly. "Every plan, every threat, it's all recorded." Carter gestured to one of the officers, who retrieved the small device with care. "In addition to that," he added, "we have high-definition video from multiple cameras in this home. The confessions you just made are on record." Ethan shook his head, his eyes wild, darting around the room like a cornered animal. No, you can't. This isn't real. Dad, tell them. Tell them you're confused." His voice cracked, desperation leaking through his false bravado. I looked at him, my own son, standing in chains of his own making, and my heart ached even as my resolve held firm. Sophia tried again, her voice trembling now. "This is entrapment. He tricked us. He recorded us without our permission." The lawyer finally spoke, his tone steady and cutting. "False. Mr. Jones has every legal right to record conversations in his own home when there is reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. You confessed freely, without coercion. That will hold up in court." One officer snapped the cuffs onto Ethan's wrists, the metallic click echoing like a final verdict. Another secured Sophia, who twisted and spat words that no longer carried power. They were dragged toward the door, their shouts bouncing off the walls that had heard every secret, every lie. I stayed seated, hands folded in front of me, watching it all unfold with a strange calm. For weeks I had played their game, swallowing their poison, letting them believe I was weak. But now the truth stood undeniable in this very room. They had thought they were burying me, but it was themselves they had buried, with greed, with arrogance, with their own words. And as the door closed behind them, silence filled the house again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence of justice. The moment the door shut and the sound of their protests faded into the distance, I sat back in my chair and let the weight of weeks crash down on me. My hands trembled, not from age, but from release. For the first time in so long, I could breathe without the stench of their lies filling the air. The officers were reading Ethan his rights when he turned his head toward me, eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and desperation. "Dad," he shouted, his voice cracking, "tell them this is a mistake. Tell them you don't want this." I looked at him, my son, my blood, the boy I once carried on my shoulders to watch fireworks on the 4th of July, the teenager I stayed up with when heartbreak crushed his young chest, the man I worked myself half to death to put through college. My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady, Do you remember the nights I came home from the plant with grease on my hands and pain in my back, but I still sat down to help you with your homework? Do you remember when you broke your arm and I slept on the hospital chair for 3 nights straight so you wouldn't wake up alone? Do you remember every sacrifice I made so you could walk across that graduation stage debt-free? All of that, all of it was love, and this is how you repay me. His face twisted, torn between shame and rage, but the words came spilling out anyway. You controlled me my whole life. You made me feel like I owed you everything. You never let me breathe. His voice shook as the cuffs clinked behind his back. I just wanted a future that wasn't chained to you. I leaned forward, my chest heavy, but my voice like iron. A father's love is not a chain, Ethan. It is a gift, one you just spat on. For a moment his eyes softened, wet with tears that looked too much like the boy I used to know. My heart cracked at the sight, but the truth was carved too deep now. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who had traded loyalty for greed. Sophia hissed beside him, venom even in defeat. Don't waste your breath on him, Richard. He made his choice. We both did. I turned my gaze to her, my voice low and steady. Yes, you did, and choices have consequences. As the officers pulled them toward the waiting car, Ethan stumbled once more, turning his face to me. Dad, please, I'm your only son. Don't let them do this to me. I stood in the doorway, rain misting against my skin, and answered him with the words that had burned in my chest for weeks. No, Ethan, you did this to yourself. And with that, I closed the door. For the first time in years, the lock clicked, not to keep danger out, but to keep peace in. The house was mine again. For the first time in months, silence didn't feel like a threat lurking in the corners. It felt like freedom, like a deep breath after nearly drowning. I sat in my old armchair, the one where I had once cradled Ethan as a boy when storms rattled the windows, the one where I had read him stories until he fell asleep. Now it was just my chair again, and I felt its weight beneath me like an anchor holding me steady. The walls, once tainted by whispers of betrayal, seemed to breathe easier too, as though they had been waiting for this moment as long as I had. Weeks passed, and the echoes of that day faded into memory. Ethan and Sophia struck a deal with the lawyers. They gave up all rights to my property, swore to stay far from me, and faced a reduced sentence instead of the decade in prison they could have earned. 18 months behind bars was what their greed bought them, and even that felt too merciful. But I let it be. Justice wasn't about vengeance anymore, it was about peace, and peace was finally mine. Neighbors who once waved politely from across the fence now became friends, my chosen family. They brought me meals, invited me into their homes, and reminded me that blood alone does not define family. Loyalty and love do. I found a new rhythm in my days. I tended to the oak tree in the yard, its branches now heavy with shade, a reminder that roots can weather storms if they are strong enough. I cooked meals for myself without needing to set a place for ungrateful mouths. I even allowed myself small joys, afternoon walks, quiet evenings with books, the simple luxury of knowing I could sleep without fear of what awaited me in the morning. Sometimes, late at night, I thought of Ethan as a boy, the laughter, the scraped knees, the dreams I had poured my soul into. My heart would ache, because love never dies as easily as trust does. But then I would remember the look in his eyes when he chose greed over blood, when he sold me out for $600,000 and a promise of freedom. That memory would steal me again, reminding me that letting go of him wasn't cruelty, it was survival. If there's one lesson I carry from all of this, it is that sacrifice means nothing to those who measure love in money. I gave my son my life, and he tried to sell it. But I refused to sign away my dignity, and in the end, that's what saved me. Now I live as a man unburdened, stronger, freer, and finally at peace in the home I built with my own hands. And to you listening now, I ask, have you ever been betrayed by someone you thought would never hurt you? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters, and your story deserves to be heard. Don't forget to subscribe. Take care of your heart, protect your dignity, and remember, not all family is made of blood.